guys, and welcome back. On last week's show, you kind of got a bit of a teaser with the laminating and all of that jazz. This week we're going to continue on with the prep of the blank and finish off our project of a Lazy Susan. Well, we're back, and this has been sitting overnight. And the first step, obviously, here is to release the clamps and just see what it is that we're looking at. So we're going to release the quick grips out of here and get these oversized cauls out of here, just like that. And we'll just put those off to the side. And you can see the wax paper really does its job, that there's no glue on this here. Nothing is glued together. The wax paper on the top of this board that we've laminated just comes right off. So we're just going to release these bar clamps. And again, we can see here that the wax paper just comes right off. And we do have some glue residue here. And what we're going to do at this point in time is I'm going to use a flush plane, and I'm just going to run it over here and take some of this glue residue off of the board. Well, what I've got is one of the oversized caul boards. I've got it clamped to the bench to give me something to push against as I'm using the flush plane. And this is the flush plane that I'm using, and this does a great job of taking away this glue residue. So you can see here we've got some of it, and we're just going to use the flush plane to come along and take off the majority of these large lumps of glue. Now I know we're not going to get it completely flat right down to the board, and that's just fine. I just want to get the large chunks off of it, because what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to run this through the thickness planer, but I want these lumps of glue off so that it's not going to cause any damage to my blade. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the rest of these lumps of glue, and then we're going to run this to the surface planer, and I'll show you how nice this board actually came out. The initial thickness of this particular board that we've laminated is 3/4 of an inch thick. Now, there was some play in it, so we need to take it down a little bit, but I don't want to lose too much of the thickness. So we're just going to pass it through the planer just enough to make each surface flat and true. Once we're done with that, we're going to stop planing. I don't want to take off too much of the thickness. Alright, so I'm done running it through the thickness planer, and I've run over it with a random orbital sander just to clean it up a little bit. I just want to show you guys how awesome this really is. Check this out. Like, that on its own is just a sexy glue up right there. I really like the way this came out. So now our next step here is going to be to get out our beam compass, or a regular compass, or whatever you want to use, and we need to draw a circle on this. But I want to make sure that I get the maximum width out of it, because I really want to get that piece of maple into that one side. So with that, we're going to measure across here, and I'm going to draw out the circle using a beam compass. I've got my board, and it's just wider than 11 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark a center mark here at 5.5 inches, just so I have somewhere to a reference point as to where to start my compass. I have my beam compass set up at 5.5 inches apart here, and of course that is going to correspond with having an 11-inch circle. So with that being said, now I'm just going to use my beam compass and draw a very prominent line, and I want it to be prominent here because I want to use a disc sander later to clean this up a bit, so I need that line to be able to see where to sand to. And there we go. There is our 11-inch circle. I don't know how well you can see that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to shoot over to the, you guessed it, the scroll saw. We're going to throw in a number 7 reverse tooth blade, and I'm going to cut this out just outside of those lines. And I say just outside because just like one of our other recent projects with the arm or the Adirondack chair arm, just outside of the line so that we can sand in to perfect it at the end. I have this rough cut now, and I just want to show you guys how far outside the line I'm going. I don't know if you can see that there, but I'm really not out that much. It might be a 32nd of an inch, maybe a 16th, but it's pretty minuscule. It's just enough to give you some room to sand. So with that being said, now I'm going to be taking this over to the disc sander, and you've seen me do it before, so I'm not going to include it in the video here, but I'm just going to sand around the perimeter of this circle to clean it right up, and that will be our main board then for our Lazy Susan. We've used the disc sander to clean up all of the edges, and I've given the top surface of this Lazy Susan quick sanding with the random orbital sander. And if you don't think that's gorgeous, there's something seriously wrong with you. One of my favorite combination, without a doubt. When it comes to contrasting woods, I love this combination. So with that being said, now we're going to move on to the next step. And our next step in this process is I'd like to put a 1/4 inch round over on the top and the bottom to really soften this whole edge here. So with that, I'm going to grab my trim router and put in that 1/4 inch round over bit, and I'm just going to go around the outer perimeter here and get this rounded off. And there we have the 1/4 inch profiles routed. It's got a nice soft edge all the way around. It truly is a great looking little board. So we're going to move on to the next part of this project, and that is making the base plate that this is going to sit on. The next thing we need to do is make the base. And for the base, I've got a piece of 1/2 inch plywood. And I know what you're thinking. Plywood? Really? Well, you know what? It's a base, and it's underneath the board. It's not visible, and it'll work just fine for being underneath. The thing is that I didn't want to put a solid slab of wood under there and end up having it warp. So I'm going to use plywood for the base, which is a little more stable. So what we've got here is a commercially available Lazy Susan base, and you can get it at any one of your big box stores or whatever. So we're just going to measure from corner to corner of the base, and that gives us 8.5 inches. So what we're going to do is we are going to draw out on this 1/2 inch plywood an 8.5 inch circle, and I would like a 1/2 inch lip. So we're going to go 9.5 inches so that we end up getting a little lip all the way around. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So we're going to start off with drawing the 8.5 inch circle. And just like that, there it is. Now we can take our base and just double check that the corners of this base should fit right inside of that circle, and they're just fine the way that they fit in there. So I would like a lip outside of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to extend the compass just a little bit more. I had said before that I would like maybe a 1/2 inch, but it doesn't have to be quite that much. So I'm going to do a second circle just like that. And now what we've got here is the one circle on the inside is our marks for mounting our Lazy Susan base. The circle on the outside is where we're going to cut. So I'm going to head back to the scroll saw and I'm going to cut out this circle. Then I'm going to hit the disc sander and clean up that outer circle, and then I'm going to come back and show you where we go from here. We have our circle cut, it's sanded, and now what we need to do is we need to mount, or mark at least, for our base plate. So if we line up all of our corners to our lines, being that circle that we drew for the inner circle here, if we line it up equally on all four corners, we should be assured that it is centered on the base. And once we get it centered like that, you need to go around and mark all four holes. Now with this particular operation, you want to be pretty sure that you've got it lined up center. Because if you don't, your Lazy Susan will spin off kilter and it's going to look a little funky. So we've got those four holes marked. Now there's another hole that you need to mark. And you may not quite get this right now, but you need to put this top part of the base at a 45-degree angle to everything else, just like I have it here. And what you want to do is you want to mark one of these screw holes here on this other section of the base. And the reason for that is you're going to drill an oversized hole right here, and that will be the entry hole to use your screwdriver to be able to put this whole thing together. And we're going to get to that in the assembly steps. But for now, what I'd like to do is center punch these four holes and get this base here screwed on to this particular base plate. And once we get our holes marked and drilled and everything's ready to go, we can disassemble it then, and I will sand this here. So what I've done here is center punched, and I've put a pilot bit hole in each one of these locations, and I've used a 5/8 Forstner bit and drilled out this one that we marked when we had it arranged at the 45. So I'm going to screw the base plate on here now, just so that that's said and done. Then I'm going to remove it and give this base plate a good sanding. Well, now it comes time to mark the holes that are going to mount our main platform. And up until this point I haven't mentioned it, but the underside, which would be the side that I initially drew the circle on, has a center mark from my beam compass. I've also left that mark. Remember I made that 5.5 inch mark right along the edge with my Incra rule? Well, that mark is still there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend that mark so that it's long enough to place my Lazy Susan base on. So I'm going to extend that mark just like that. And what I'm going to do now is carefully measure center to center on the corners of these holes. And once I get that measurement center to center, I'm going to mark that on here, center it on my line, drill some pilot holes, and I'm going to screw this base down along that line. Now I know then that that should be pretty much centered like that, and then I will mark for these holes here, drill my pilot holes, and of course screw that to the base, and then I will sand the whole underside of this project. So with a careful measurement, like I said, center to center on these holes, we have 7 7/8 of an inch. So we need to divide that in half. So half of 7 7/8 is 3 15/16. So from the center point where you had your compass, you'll want to mark 3 15/16 there, and same with the other side. From the center mark, you want to measure out 3 15/16. And those two marks now should be where you will be mounting this particular Lazy Susan base. And we can test that, of course, just by laying it over top and making sure that those holes are centered. And I can see here that yes, indeed they are. So let's go ahead and drill those 2 pilot holes, screw this down, and then we can mark for these 2 holes, drill it, and screw those down. And I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll come back to you. Okay, let's go through the assembly of this thing. So what we've got is our plywood base, and you want to take your Lazy Susan base now, and you want to lay it down over the holes that you have put in it, and of course screw it down. Now we're not going to be taking this apart again, so you can go ahead and, you know, torque them down as much as you would to call it a finished product. You don't want to go too heavy on the torquing of these because it is only plywood after all, and you know, you don't want to strip it out. But either way, so we'll put in our 4 screws here, and I'll come back to you once I get those in. Our 4 screws are in, our base is attached. Now what you want to do is bring your main top surface and turn this thing over upside down on it. And that hole now that you drilled, that 5/8 Forstner bit hole, I don't know how well you can see that, but it lines up with the holes for the screws in this base plate. So you can just take your screw, go right down through that hole, and give it a little snug. You don't want to crank it down because you may have to make adjustments. And as you go around the Lazy Susan and rotate this base, this 5/8 of an inch hole will line up at each individual spot to be able to put in your mounting screws. And again, like I said, don't crank them down because you may need to make some subtle adjustments, as I've been doing here. So just like that, and we'll see how this is lining up. Actually not too bad. So line them all up and tighten them down, and we have one more to put in, which would be the guy on this side. And once we get that in, that is it for the assembly of this. Like that, and we'll tighten down this last one that we never did crank all the way down. And then just like that, your Lazy Susan is put together. And there you have it, a Lazy Susan. Unfortunately, this one here is going to be given away. This is for a gift. There is one last step that I will be doing to this other than applying a finish, and that will be to put some non-slip rubber feet on the base so that it's not sliding all over as they're trying to use it. But there you go. Great way to use up some scraps in your shop. And I hope you guys give it a try. I hope you've enjoyed this week's video. Guys, thanks again for watching, and I'm going to see you again next week with yet another woodworking video.